Hey, what's up everyone? How's it? Very good. Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Mem Gimel, Daf 143 of Masechta Shabbis. You know what that means, friends? What's 157 minus 143? Who could tell me? It's 14, I think. Now, 14 divided by 7 days of the week is 2. Friends, that means 2 weeks from today, we'll be making our well-deserved Siyum HaMasechta Shabbos. Okay. Today, there aren't like necessarily big juicy sugyas, which I guess is good and not good, meaning, let's start with the not good. Well, it's not good. So whatever, I guess it's good. Because why shouldn't it be good? I just confused myself. Let's get started. But, yeah, so we're going to start off, the first one is going to kind of talk about muktsa-ey kinds of things, and we're going to conclude the 21st parak notel, and begin the 22nd parak chavis. And then we're going to talk about juicing kinds of things a little bit on Daf Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Friends, let's jump in. We're right now at the bottom of Daf Kuf Mem Beis, Amud Beis. Now the last thing that we had said was that Rava would put a knife on raw dove meat, and that way he would transport the raw dove meat. Now, Rav Yosef responded sharply to Rava, as well as Abaye, who had also put a spoon on a bundle of wheat so he could transport that, and said, look at these young whippersnappers who they think they're so smart that they could just take muksa and then put something on it and carry it. To which Abaye said, look, I'm only doing it because I'm an Adam Chashiv, I'm Rosh Yeshiva. I don't want people to think that you can move muksa, so I'm making it clear that, I'm putting something non-muksa so that I'm not just moving muksa plain. However, the fact of the matter is, says Abaye, that this bundle of wheat I would be able to move in any event because I can, this raw wheat, I can always just lean on it. Rava says, me too. This raw dove's meat, I'm happy to just eat it raw. It's called muktsa. It's not just called raw meat. It's called muktsa. And I like eating muktsa. Fine. So what did Rava basically say? Rava said, well, don't be confused by this knife that I'm putting on the meat. Don't get the wrong idea and assume that it's muktsa, which I think is probably a design flaw. If people are going to get the wrong idea, then you should probably rethink how you're doing it. Akopanim. What he was saying though was that this meat was not muktsa anyways, because he would eat it raw. So friends, you ready for this? Here's the Gemara's kasha. That implies that if Rava wouldn't eat this meat raw, well, then it would be muktsa. And Rava is saying that the reason why it's not muktsa, right? The reason why it's mukhan, the reason why even without the knife he's saying that Meikar Adin, he would be able to move the meat is because he eats it raw, implying that if he didn't eat it raw, it would be muktsa. To which the Gemara asks the kasha. So the Gemara says, I'm on 3 lines from the bottom, all the way at the end of the line. So it sounds like the reason why Rava is saying that this meat, now I also have to assume that we're talking about a dove that was shechted, because if it wasn't shechted, then he wouldn't be able to eat it. What do you mean he can eat it raw? It's not shechted. So I assume that we're talking about a dove that you shechted. And obviously if you shechted the dove, you're intending to eat it, right? If it's for your animal, you wouldn't have to shecht it. You wouldn't have to do shchita, right? So we're talking about a dove that Rava had slaughtered in order to eat it. And he's saying what? That the reason why when it's raw, it's considered mukhan is because, which of course is the opposite of muktsa, so it's considered mukhan because he would eat it raw, implying that if he wouldn't be eating it raw, then it would be muktsa. Halo chazi lo, lo. Which sounds like if he wouldn't be able to eat it raw, then it would be muktsa. So this gets into the sugya of mukhan le'adam have mukhan le'behema, right? So there's a machlokas apparently Masechta Beitza between Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda regarding. So obviously Reb Shimon doesn't hold of muktsa and Rabbi Yehuda does hold of muktsa, and Rabbi Yehuda says that something that is mukhan le'adam, so such as this meat, right? This dove was shechted before Shabbos. So clearly the fact that you did shchita shows that that it's for human consumption. Now, at the same time, it's also raw, which means that we're assuming that, so Rava would eat raw meat, but the assumption is if he wouldn't eat raw meat, well then this meat that was set aside for human consumption by the fact that you shechted it, even though, most people wouldn't eat this raw meat, but you can give it to a cat would be more than happy to eat it. And yet, from the fact that we're saying that Rava is assuming that if he wouldn't be eating it, then it would be considered muktzah, well, what about the fact that you can feed it to a cat? Shouldn't that be enough to make it considered mukhan because I can make it animal food? So the fact that we're saying that if Rava wouldn't eat this raw meat, it would be considered muktsa, well, that implies that even though this meat was mukhan la'adam, it's not considered mukhan lebehema. And therefore, since he can't eat it himself, the fact that he can give it to the animal doesn't matter. And it would now be considered muktzah since he wouldn't eat it raw. So it sounds like Rava is holding like Rav Yehuda, who says mukhan le'adam, something that was set aside to be for human consumption, you cannot feed to an animal. So it sounds like Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda. And that's why he's saying that only because he would personally eat this raw meat, that's why it's considered mukhan. However, for people who wouldn't eat this meat raw, it would be muktzah, like Rabbi Yehuda. So the Memad Rava, Rabbi Yehuda Svirle. So does that mean that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda? Ve'amar Rava l'shamma'e, but didn't Rava say to his attendant, Tavi li bar avza ushdimei lishunra? Cook for me this goose and throw its intestines to the cat. Which means what? Which means when Yom Tov started, so this is talking about on Yom Tov, right? So he's saying cook the goose and feed its intestines to the cat. And what Rava is saying is that even though when Yom Tov started, the intestines were part of this goose, and the goose was set aside for Rava's consumption, so it was mukhan le'adam, and we're saying that it wouldn't be considered mukhan for the animal. Meaning if he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, so since this goose was set aside for his human consumption, it would be considered mukhan le'adam, but mukhan le'adam is not mukhan lebehema, so you wouldn't be able to throw the intestines that you don't want, you wouldn't be able to throw it to the animal. So Hasam came with the Masrach Daite Ilave Me'asmo. So the Gemara says, no, really Rava does hold like Rabbi Yehuda. And he does hold of muktzah, and he also holds that mukhan le'adam lo avi mukhan lebehema. That something that's prepared for human consumption is considered muktzah for animal consumption. However, when it comes to that goose, it's different. Because he knew that he's going to have to do something with the intestines. It's not the first time he shechted a goose. And he also knows that the intestines are going to get rancid if he just leaves them out. So he knows at the time that he shechs the goose that he's planning to eat the meat and give the intestines to the animal. So therefore, his kavana already before Yom Tov was that these intestines are going to go to the animal. So it was already mukhan for the animal when Yom Tov started. Hachinami mistava, dirava Rabbi Yehuda Svirle. And it also makes sense to say that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to muksa. The Darish Rava isha lo sikanis levesa eitzim mitomein ud. That a woman should not go into, and I assume the same applies to a man, should not go into a wood shed and find a piece of wood that she can use to stoke coals in a fire, because wood is going to be muktzah. And therefore she wouldn't be able to take a piece of wood, I guess probably for Yom Tov, to stoke the coals of the fire, because the wood would be muktzah. The ud, and if you had a stick already set aside to stoke coals with, shenishbar, so basically it was a kli and it was mukhan, but then it broke in half, and it's no longer a kli that you can use for stoking the coals, but you can always just chuck the pieces in the fire. So v'ud shenishbar, asul asiku b'yom tov, you're not allowed to throw it into the Yom Tov. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, while you're allowed to throw a kli into a fire, so for example, if you wanted to take this stick that you had already set aside to stoke coals, and you wanted to put that in the fire, well, because it was not muktzah. But if it breaks in half, and now it's nolad, I mean, you had the stick that was initially a kli that you can use for stoking coals, it broke in half, you can no longer use it for stoking coals, now you can use it for firewood, but it wasn't for firewood when Yom Tov started, so therefore it's nolad. Rabbi Yehuda says it's muktsa and you can't throw it into a fire, and Rava agrees with that. So we see that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda regarding muktsa. Very interesting. New Mishnah, Beis Shammai Omim, says Beis Shammai, Ma'avirin me'al hashulchan atzamos uklipin. So if you are eating at a table on Shabbos, and you're eating meat, and once you've eaten meat, so now you have bones. So you're eating steak, and now there's a big bone. Uklipin, or let's say you have epis shells from nuts. I don't know, you're eating sunflower seeds. You put them in your mouth, you extract the seed, you spit out the shells on the table, and now you have slobbery shells on the table. So both the bones and the slobbery shells are muktzah. They're useless, let's say. What are you going to do with the bone? What are you going to do with slobbery shells? So Beis Shammai says, nonetheless, you can remove them from the table. You don't have to be concerned about muktzah. Okay, fine. Whereas Beis Hillel says you can don't move the shells because they're muktzah, and the bones, rather pick up the table and take the table somewhere, and then the table's a kli, you can move the table and then shake off the table somewhere, and rather than picking up the muktsa directly. Okay, fine. You can remove from the table crumbs of bread that are less than a kazayas, right? So you're eating bread, lemaisa, and then there were some crumbs that were less than a kazayas, so you could pick them up and remove them from the table. V'seir shalafun and v'seir adashim, and pods of peas and pods of lentils, because you can feed it to the animal, which is interesting, because going back to our discussion a few minutes ago of muchan l'adam having muchan l'behema, so here you have this, let's say bread is an easy example. It's obviously muchan l'adam, right? It was for human consumption when Shabbos started, and now you have these pieces that are less than a kazayas, and you want to give them to the animal, and we're saying that that's acceptable, so that would sound like Rib Shimon. Svug, a sponge, or beis achiza, if there is hide that you can use to as a handle for the sponge, mekanchin bo, well then you can use the sponge to clean with. Ve'imlo ein mekanchin bo, but if there is no handle, then you cannot use this sponge because there is a concern of schita, of extracting whatever liquid was in the sponge. Okay, fine. Ben kach uven kach nitol b'Shabbos ve'enu mekabel tuma. And whether it has a handle, whether it doesn't have a handle, if it's dry, you'd be allowed to move it on Shabbos and it's not makabel tumah. And Rashi says something interesting. Why is it not makabel tumah? De'enu lo kli eitz, v'lo beged, v'lo sak, v'lo mateches. Because the fact of the matter is, it's not made out of wood, it's not made out of fabric, it's not made out of sackcloth, and it's not made out of metal. Meaning it's very interesting that, in order for something to be tameh, it has to fall into one of these categories. If it doesn't fall into one of the categories, then it's not, can be shaykh b'chlal to the laws of tumah. Says the Gemara, Amar of Nachman, Anu ein lanu ele Beis Shammai k'Rab Yehuda u'Beis Hillel k'Rab Shimon. So our Mishnah had implied, of course, right? I'm sure, right? Many people noticed that Beis Shammai seems to be the one saying, not holding of muktzah, like Reb Shimon, and Beis Hillel is holding of muktzah. Beis Shammai says that if you have bones and if you have shells on the table, you can remove them. What about the fact that they're muktzah? Beis Shammai doesn't hold of muktzah. Beis Hillel says, no, you got to pick up the entire table, go somewhere and dump it because he's concerned about muktzah, he's concerned about moving the bones and the shells. Says of Nachman, I understand that the Mishnah is saying that Beis Shammai holds like Reb Shimon and Beis Hillel holds like Reb Yehuda. However, Reb Nachman, Anu, ein lanu ela Beis Shammai k'Reb Yehuda Beis Hillel k'Reb Shimon. L'maaseh, the fact of the matter is, for whatever reason, we assume that Beis Shammai is the one who holds like Reb Yehuda, and Beis Hillel holds like Reb Shimon regarding muktzah. So we said that you're allowed to remove from the table pieces of bread that are smaller than a kazayas. Misayele Rabbi Yochanan, this supports Rabbi Yochanan, Dam Rabbi Yochanan, Perurin she'ein boyin kazayis asur la'avdim biyad. Rabbi Yochanan says that pieces of bread that are less than a kazayis, you can't just destroy them, directly. So we see that in our Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't say just take these small pieces of bread and throw them on the floor. It doesn't say that. It says remove them from the table, meaning you have to treat them properly and with respect, even though they're smaller than a kazayis. Se'ar shalafunin, the pods of peas, money. So who is the Tana that would say that you are allowed to take the pea pods and these small pieces of bread and remove them from the table and give them to the animal? I.e., who would say that it wouldn't be muktsa? This food that was for human consumption, and now you want to make it animal consumption. So Reb Shimoni, today's le muktsa. So obviously this is Reb Shimoni who doesn't hold of muktsa, because if it was Reb Yehuda, we said that muchan la'adam lo avi muchan lebehema. Something that was set aside for human consumption is not able to be fed to the animal. So ema seifa. One second. But let's go weiter in our Mishnah. What does it say? Svug im yeshlo beis achiza mekanchin bo v'im lav ein mekanchin bo. The Mishnah had said that if you have a sponge that has a handle on it, well then you're allowed to use it for sponging if it's wet. But if there's no handle, then you wouldn't be allowed to, let's say wash dishes with it. So, Asan Rabbi Yehuda. Well, that sounds like it's Rabbi Yehuda. That sounds like Rabbi Yehuda says Davashin Miskavin is also. Why? Because if you have this sponge, there's no handle on it. We're saying that it's also. Why? Because you might come to do schita, to extract the liquid from it. That would be a davar she'einu miskavin. So the Gemara says, no, that is not a davar she'einu miskavin. We're not talking about davar she'einu miskavin and saying it's also because Rabbi Yehuda says that davar she'einu miskavin is also. That is not what it is. No, regarding this sponge without a handle, Reb Shimon would also say that you're not allowed to use it because it's not a davar she'einu miskavin, which is mutter. It's a psikreshe v'lo yamus. If you use this sponge, then 1000% you are going to be extracting the liquid from the sponge and it'll be schita. So therefore, if there's no handle on the sponge, you may not use it because it's schita. The assumption being that if there is a handle on the sponge, it won't necessarily at least be schita. Maybe it's a davar she'einu miskavin. Okay. Hanigar inin de tamre armiyasa sharl letatolinu ho v'chazan agav iman. So, pits of dates. So humans don't really eat pits of dates, but animals do. So what happens if you have a date? What can you do with its pit, which is for animal consumption? So Hanigar inin de tamri armiyasa. So the pits of Aramean dates, which weren't very tasty. Humans don't usually care for Aramean dates, so it's basically just the entire date is for animal consumption. And therefore, the pits as well, since the flesh of the date is for animal consumption, the pit just kind of, comes along memela, and it's also for animal consumption. You can feed it to your animal on Shabbos. So you're allowed to move these pits since the flesh of the pit is good, is shaykh for animal food and was always shaykh for animal food when Shabbos started. So therefore, you're allowed to move the pit, and it's not muktsa, it's just animal food. With the farsiyasa, but what about the Persian dates? Asr. Then you are not allowed to move the pits of the Persian dates because Persian dates are for human consumption. They're much tastier. And therefore, the flesh is for human consumption, but the pit, however, was part of the date when Shabbos started, but the pit itself, once the flesh has been eaten, is only for animals. And therefore, we're going to say that it is muktsa, and this of course would be according to Rabbi Yehuda, that since it's muchan la'adam, this date was set aside for human consumption, the pit, which was part of it when Shabbos started, would not be able to be fed to the animal. Okay? Shmuel metatulu agav rifta. Shmuel, what he would do is when he would eat these dates, he would spit out the pits onto bread. And then he would be able to move the dates, maybe, and move the pits, maybe throw them in the garbage or something. Shmuel the Taimeh, and Shmuel is according to his reasoning, as we've seen in Brachis, and also somewhere else in Shabbos, Damar Shmuel, Osa Adam Kol Tzarko B'Pas, a person could do whatever he wants with bread. And therefore, he could spit out these pits on the bread and then I guess take them to the garbage. Rabba metaltalu agav lakna demaya. Rabba would spit the pits into a jug of water, and then he would just take the jug of water and dump it out somewhere. Rav Huna breda of Yoshua avilu kigraf shorei. So Rav Huna breda of Yoshua, he would just make a whole big mound of date pits, and then it would get like disgusting. And once it's disgusting, it was a graf shorei. It was like removing excrement or garbage, which is allowed. So then he would remove it. Amar le Rav Ashi le Ameimar. V'chiyos graf shorei lechatchila. So Rav Ashi says to Ameimar, are you allowed to just do that? You're allowed to just, intentionally make something that would be considered a graf shorei? No answer. Rav Sheshes zariklu belishne. Interestingly, Rav Sheshes, he would spit them out. I guess see how you would spit them to the other end of the room. Yeah, I don't know what the word for that. I feel like there's a funny word for that. I don't know, but whatever it is, he would perfect his long distance spitting, and he would get that pit down to the other end of the room. Very impressive. Rav Papa zarklu achori amita. Rav Papa would throw the pits behind the bed that he was reclining on when he was eating. Amar Lav Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas she'amachzer panav achori amita v'zarkon. So Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas would turn his face to the behind his bed, and then he would either spit them there or throw them there, whatever it was. Friends, who's Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas? The Gemara says in Gittin that the Anvisanuso Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas hechrev es beis miktashenu, etc. There was that story with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa in Masechta Gittin, Daf Nun Zayin, that there was a whole thing a whole story with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and the rabbis didn't know what to do with this korban that they wanted to bring for the Caesar, and Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas was concerned and told them not to offer the korban out of concern that people might get the wrong idea, and so they didn't bring the korban, and then things kind of deteriorated from there. So that's Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas. I was thinking maybe on Tisha B'Av, we'll see. Maybe on Tisha B'Av I'll do a Facebook Live in the afternoon. We can learn together those Gemaras of the Churban Abayis from Masechta Gittin. Very interesting Gemaras over there. All right. Hadran Allah notel Adam es bi no. New parak. Chavis shenishbra matzilin emena mazon shalish sudis v'omer lacherim bo v'atzilach muvad shalayisbo. Okay, so let's read that again. So chavis shenishbra, if you have a barrel, let's say it's a wine barrel, and the wine barrel breaks lemaise. So matzilin hemena mazon shalish sudis, so you can save from the wine barrel, I guess, enough wine for 3 meals. Okay? And he can also tell his friends, look guys, my wine barrel broke, I can only take 3 meals worth, go and chaperein. As long as he doesn't take a sponge and kind of sponge up the wine that is spilled, because we're concerned that he might come to schita, he might come and extract the wine from the sponge. We do not juice fruits to extract the juice from them. And what if you have a bunch of fruits? Let's say you have a bunch of epis apples, and you look at I don't know how this would happen, but you go and you look at the apples, and you see underneath them is apple juice. Some of the juice just kind of somehow got out of the fruits on their own. Asurin. You're not allowed to drink that juice, because we're concerned that if you drink the juice, you might end up then going and squeezing the apples some more to extract more juice because it was so delicious. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, im le'ochlin ayotzi men mutter, v'im le'mashkin ayotzi men aser. Well, so Rabbi Yehuda says, well, it depends what your intention was. If your intention was to get a bunch of apples and bring them inside so that you have apples to eat, well, then your intention isn't to extract the juice from them. And even if some juice comes out of the apples on their own, you can just drink the juice. We're not concerned that you're then going to go back and squeeze the apples. That wasn't your intention. However, if you had collected the apples in the first place for juicing, and then some juice already started coming out, and you drank the juice, and it was so delicious, well, then we're concerned that you might then go back and extract more juice from the apples, and we don't want you doing that on Shabbos. So therefore, if you gather them to extract the juice in the first place, do not drink the juice that comes out of them. Chalos devash shiriskan me'erev Shabbos. If you have honeycombs and you smashed the honeycomb, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Chopped epis or crushed. I think crushed is the word I was looking for. So chalos devash shiriskan me'erev Shabbos. So if you have honeycombs, you have this big waxy honeycomby thingy, and you crush it from erev Shabbos. And now on Shabbos, the honey, what you do is, apparently, I guess you crush the honeycomb and then you just allow the honey to just kind of ooze out on its own. So if you crushed the honeycomb before Shabbos and now it's Shabbos and the honey is oozing out, can you eat that honey? Sounds very delicious. So the Chacham say, no, you cannot. Rabbi Eliezer Mater, Rabbi Eliezer says, yes, you may. Friends, let's look at the Gemara. Tana lo yispog b'yayin v'lo yitpach b'shemen. So we learn in a brisa that you may not soak up wine with a sponge, and you also, if there's oil that leaked, you may not take your hand and kind of like rub it in the oil and then take your hand and kind of rub it against the jar so that the oil gets from, let's say, the table that it spilled on back into the jar. Okay? Okay, because apparently that's how you would do things during the week, and we don't want you doing things the way that you do them during the week. Okay? I'll tell you honestly, I don't necessarily understand how to understand this uvdin the whole thing. Like, it seems pretty subjective. I mean, I must also admit, I haven't really tried to understand it too deeply, but it does seem like a concept that is somewhat subjective. Like, where do we apply it and where don't we apply it? Taner Rabbanan, nispazu lo peiris b'chatzer, if he had a bunch of fruits that got scattered in his courtyard, melakit al yad v'ochel, he can just collect the fruits and eat them. Ava lo l'soch asav, lo l'soch akupa, but don't collect the fruits and gather them in a basket or a box, shlo yaisek derech shu osu b'chol, because they don't want him to do it like he does it during the week. So therefore, since in the week, I guess he would gather his fruit and put it in some kind of a box. So therefore, if his fruit got scattered in the courtyard, rather than putting them in a box, he should just, if he's hungry, he could take one and eat it, but he shouldn't be gathering them and collecting them and putting them away, because that's how he does it in the week. In sochten es aperis, we do not extract juice from fruit. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, Modeh haya Rabbi Yehuda lachachamim b'zeisim va'anavim. Now, what was the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the chachamim? Rabbi Yehuda said, well, it depends. If you take fruit and you gather them and collect them and bring them into your house to eat them, well then, even if some juice comes out of them, you can consume the juice, because since you collected them for eating, we're not concerned that you're then going to say, wow, this juice was good, let me go juice them, because that wasn't your intention. Whereas the Chacham say, no matter what, if there's juice that comes out of these fruits, you may not consume the juice, because we're concerned that you might then end up enjoying it so much that you'll juice the fruits, even if that wasn't your initial intention. So, now says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, that however, there's an exception to Rabbi Yehuda's rule, which is olives and grapes. Because since it, sort of in general, you extract oil from olives and you extract juice from grapes, therefore we're concerned that even if initially your intention was to eat the olives and to eat the grapes, if you were to drink the juice from the grapes or the oil from the olives, you might say, you know what? This is really good. Let me actually do like everybody else does. Let me just extract the oil or the juice. And we're concerned that when it comes to olives, when it comes to grapes, that if you drink the juice, even if you had initially brought them inside for eating, we're concerned that you might end up juicing them on, extracting the juice on the liquid on Shabbos. And therefore, when it comes to olives and grapes, even if you brought them in for eating, you would not be allowed to consume the liquids that came from the olives or the grapes. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, I'm going to read that again. Modeh haya Rabbi Yehuda lachacham, that Rabbi Yehuda admitted to the chacham b'zeisim va'anavim, that when it comes to olives, when it comes to grapes, even if you had brought them in for eating, you would not be allowed to consume the liquids that come out of them on their own. My time hakam came to the schita ninu, because since in general you extract juice or liquid from olives and grapes, Yoiv Daite, he might say, you know what? This juice was actually really good. Let me go and juice it completely. Ve'ula amar Rav. Ula says the name Rav. Chalukaya Rabbi Yehuda af b'zeisim v'anavim. So Ula says the name of Rav that no, Rabbi Yehuda did not make any exceptions. Just like he argues with apples, he also argues with olives and grapes. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Alachuk Rabbi Yehuda b'shai peres ve'en Alachuk Rabbi Yehuda b'zeisim v'anavim. So Rabbi Yochanan kind of learns like Ula in the name of Rav, which is that Rabbi Yehuda argues on the Chachamim also when it comes to grapes and when it comes to olives. However, the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to grapes and when it comes to olives. Rather, when it comes to grapes and it comes to olives, if you collected them for eating, you may not consume the liquids that come out of them. Amar, so it says here Rabba. There's a different gears that reads Rabbi Abba, and they make, I think, a good argument for Rabbi Abba. Let's go with Rabbi Abba. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, because as we know from Masechta Brachos, Rabbi Abba was a student of Rabbi Yehuda, because there was one of those stories where Rabbi Abba was making Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and Rabbi Yehuda was not into people making Aliyah. So Rabbi Abba, on his way to making Aliyah, he just kind of stopped by the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yehuda to hear Chaparayim, one last halacha. So Rabbi Abba was saying in the name of Rav Yehuda, who was saying in the name of Shmuel, Modahaya Rabbi Yehuda lachachamim b'zeisim v'anavim. That, okay, like we just said, that Rabbi Yehuda would admit to the Chachamim, when it comes to olives and when it comes to grapes, that even if you collected them for food, you would not be allowed to consume the liquids that come out of them. Umodim Chacham Rabbi Yehuda b'shar peres, and at the same time, the Chachamim admit to Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to other fruits, such as apples, let's say, that if you collected them for eating, the juice that comes out of them on their own on Shabbos, you would be allowed to drink. Well, Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Abba, so Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Abba, Elabamai Plige. Well, if that's the case, then where do they actually argue? Sounds like they're in full agreement. Both the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda agree that when it comes to olives, when it comes to grapes, you would not be allowed to drink the liquid that comes out of them on their own in any circumstance. And both Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim agree that when it comes to things like apples, you would be able to consume the juice that comes out of them if you collected them for eating. So then where do they argue? So interestingly, Rabbi Abba answers Rabbi Yirmiyah, and he says, I don't know, you go find the answer. Okay. So basically Rabbi Abba said something, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked him a question, and Rabbi Abba's like, I don't know, you go find the answer. Fine. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, now says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Mistaver betutim v'rimonim plige. Says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, you know what? Where do they, you know where they argue? It's true. They agree when it comes to grapes and when it comes to olives. And it's true that we said that by everything else, they would also agree. So where do they disagree? Mistav betutim rimonim plige. That Reb Yehuda and the Chacham disagree when it comes to tutim, which, I don't know, tutim in general is strawberries, but I saw the article define them as mulberries. But maybe let's take a vote. What do you guys want to hear? You want to hear strawberries or you want to hear mulberries? Strawberries it is. So they argue when it comes to strawberries and pomegranates. Titania, as we learn in the Brayso, Zeisim shemashach men shemen, vanavim shemashach men yain. So if you have oil, if you have olives, that some oil came out of the olives on their own, and you have some grapes, that the juice came out of the grapes on their own. V'chnisan, and then you brought these grapes and these olives into your house. Le'ochel, bein lemashkin, whether you brought them in for food or whether you brought them in for drinks. Hayotze me'en aser. Whatever liquid comes out of them, you may not consume because they're grapes and olives, and therefore consume that you might end up continuing to extract the liquid from them. However, tutim shemashach men mayim, v'rimonim shemashach men yain. However, strawberries that some juice came out of them, or pomegranates that juice came out of them, v'chnisan le'ochlin, and you brought them into your house for food, well then, ayotze men mutter. Well then, whatever comes out of them, you are allowed to drink. However, if you brought in these strawberries or these pomegranates either with no particular intention or in order to juice them, well then any liquid that comes out of them you may not drink. And this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and he's saying that when it comes to pomegranates and when it comes to strawberries, so then whatever liquid comes out of them, if it was la'achila, you would be allowed to eat it. Whereas the Chacham say that whether you're planning to eat these things, whether you're planning to drink these things, it makes no difference. When it comes to strawberries and pomegranates, you may not consume the liquid that comes from them. Friends, we're going to stop here. That was daf Kuf Mem Gimel. Cool daf, right? Yeah, pretty smooth sailing. So let us review. At the beginning, the first Amud, we kind of talked about muksa kinds of things. We talked about them, no big chidushim here. There was the concept that according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds of muksa, he also holds of mukhan, the adam, loave mukhan, the klavim. That food that is set aside for human consumption, you may not feed to an animal. Other than that, we basically, the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon came up. Rabbi Yehuda, of course, doesn't hold of. Rabbi Yehuda, of course, does hold of muksa. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of muksa. We completed Perek Notel. We started Perek Chavis. We talked about juicing fruits, and we said that when it comes to olives and grapes, so Rabbi Yehuda says in the Mishnah that if you take fruit and you bring them into your house for eating, well then the liquid that comes out of them you can drink on Shabbos. The Chacham say that you may not, because we're concerned that you might end up juicing more of them. So now, what about when it comes to olives and grapes? So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that Rabbi Yehuda admits to the Chacham that olives and grapes you would not be allowed to consume the liquids ever. Ula says in the name of Rab that Rabbi Yehuda maintains his argument against the Chacham even when it comes to olives and when it comes to grapes. Rabbi Yochanan says that while Rabbi Yehuda maintains his argument, the halacha is not like him when it comes to olives and grapes. Then we talked about strawberries and pomegranates. And we said that, right, because we had this other statement of Rabbah or Rabbi Abba in the name of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, that Rabbi Yehuda admits to the Chacham when it comes to grapes and olives, and the Chacham admit to Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to everything else. Well, then where do they argue? So we said that they argue about pomegranates and strawberries, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that when you bring them in for ochel, you're allowed to drink the liquid. The Chacham say that you're never allowed to drink the liquid. Friends, that was daf Kuf Mem Gimel. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a great day or night or whatever. Peace.